Travelling an empty road in the dead of night can be an eerie experience, especially if the road travelled is off the beaten path. One would be hard pushed to imagine a more chilling scenario than being faced with a spectre looming out of the night on a quiet, unlit road. Whether they be major city roads or country lanes steeped in darkness, there are many chilling stories surrounding England's highways. I'll bring you 4 such stories spanning over 150 years. This story was originally told to author G.F. Munford and featured in his 1921 book Ghosts and Legends of South Somerset. The book was, by the author's own admission, a vague account of tales from the area, told to him as a young man in the late 19th century, and retold to the best of his ability some 40 years later. This is an 1870 account from a local man who swore the story is true, no matter how unbelievable it may sound. He explained that in late November of 1851 he travelled on foot from the village of Stokes-upon-Hampden to the town of Crewkerne, where he was staying at the time. He explained that the rain fell in sheets that night, and the wind was violent and threw everything around him into confusion. He said that the darkness put on its blackest mantle to be in dreary conformity with its colleagues the wind and rain. He was in a hurry to escape the weather, so scrambled along the empty dark country roads, through ever-deepening water. After walking for what he believed to be 3 or 4 miles, he said he arrived at a road midway between West Chinook and Crewkerne, a road he referred to as Sandy Road. He said that it dipped into a small valley, and as he approached the lowest point, he described how the darkness suddenly became less intense as the rain pooled around his ankles. He said it was then that I became conscious that I was not alone, for immediately in front of me appeared to be a woman seated in the middle of the road. It was a young woman in her nightdress. Her long dark hair hung over her naked shoulders, and the expression on her face, he explained, was the wildest and most vacant I ever saw or ever wished to see again. At this point he states he did not believe in ghosts, and thought that the woman, being so far away from human inhabitation, was insane, and had escaped from her confinement. Summoning all of his courage, he approached her, not knowing what he was going to say as he drew closer. He then slowly circled her as she sat in the road, calmly combing her hair, apparently unaffected by the wind and rain. With a sudden realization that he was in the company of something otherworldly, he said that the blood tingled through his veins. Quickly making his way past her, he ran up the road until he was well clear of the apparition. He stopped part way and turned to look back. She was still there, sat with her back to him. For a moment he thought he could hear a woman's voice carried on the wind which said, "Oh, why does he not come?" As he continued on his way, the darkness became intense once again, and for the rest of his journey, as he waded through the rain and mud, he replayed the event over in his mind, wondering if it was a figment of his imagination brought on by the stress and fatigue of his journey. He says that he kept his experience to himself for a long time for fear of being called a liar, but some years later eventually retold it to an old friend one day as they walked the same road. After he described to his friend what he had witnessed that night, and pointed out the exact spot that he had seen the apparition, his friend explained a bit about the history of the area, saying that the field next to the road was once called Nell Clifford's Lake, because of an incident that occurred there in the latter part of the 18th century, the exact year being unknown. It's a long story, but I'll try to retell it now with enough detail to give you a clear picture of what allegedly transpired. A successful farmer by the name of Abraham Clifford once owned the surrounding land and lived in a farmhouse which no longer stands. His daughter's name was Ellen Clifford, or Nell as her parents called her. She was an attractive young woman with many admirers, but only one of them interested her. It was a man by the name of Harry Gill, and the pair were due to be married on Christmas Day of that year. Their arrangement was known by all, including a man who would remain anonymous in the story, because there were still many people living in the area with the same surname, and for fear of offending people after the publication of his book, the author decided to leave it out. He was described as an ill-bred fellow, not at all good enough for young Nell. It's said that this man, a long-time admirer of Nell Clifford, was overheard saying that he would break the skull of Harry Gill before he could marry her. A month before Harry Gill and Nell Clifford were to be married, Harry was thrown from his horse one night and killed. When his body was found, there were severe wounds to his head, not consistent with those typically caused by being thrown from a horse, and many people in the area suspected foul play. But with no proof of this, the death was ruled accidental. Harry Gill's death was reported to the Clifford household, and with a heavy heart it was Nell's father's duty to tell his daughter of her loss. But he wasn't able to break the news, and instead told her that Harry had been badly injured in a riding accident. Later that day, Harry Gill's unnamed rival visited Nell's home and gloated to the family that Harry Gill had been killed the night before, leaving Nell without a future husband. In a frenzy of anger and overwhelming sadness, Nell fell into a catatonic state. When she came to, she was in denial, telling her family that Harry was alive and on his way to see her. As the hours turned to days and Nell's lover didn't show, she began to accept his fate and fell into deep depression. Christmas Day, the day of the planned wedding, soon came around. It was a dismal rainy day, and as the evening rolled in, so did the storm clouds. On hearing the wind and rain, Nell told her parents that Harry had arrived because she could hear him approaching on horseback. Her parents put up their usual facade, playing along with their daughter's desperate fantasy. When the family went to bed that night, Nell left the farmhouse. Some say that she went to meet Harry Gill, whom she had convinced herself was on his way. The next day, unaware that she had left the premises the night before, her parents desperately searched the grounds for their daughter. Then it occurred to her father that Nell may have taken the road that Harry Gill would have rode down to meet her. Abraham Clifford and his wife set out to the location to find their daughter face down in the muddy rainwater at the lowest point of Sandy Road. The surrounding fields and much of the road had been submerged. Some believed she had taken her own life, while others said she was too timid a soul to do so and was simply overcome by the elements and feelings of grief and passed out in the rainwater. She was wearing a white nightdress and still held in her hand a hair comb. After this story was first published in local newspaper Pullman's Weekly News in December of 1870, the author received a letter from a reader who claimed to have seen the apparition of a woman in a white gown on the corner of a road in the area. It wasn't the same location as described in our story, but it was less than a mile away. I should mention that today at least there is no Sandy Road in the area, but there is a road called Sandy Hole. It lies north of Crewkerne in the village of Merriott, and is in fact, as the original storyteller mentioned, between West Chinook and Crewkerne, which is the route he claims to have taken. It isn't the fastest natural route today, and probably wouldn't have been in 1851, even though roads weren't as abundant. But in the dead of night, and going by nothing more than his own instincts during a storm, it would have been easy to navigate off course. I paid a visit to Sandy Hole, and as described in the story, the road dips deeply, and it's easy to see how the area would be prone to flooding. The storyteller also said that he had travelled 3 or 4 miles at the point at which he met the apparition. If the story is true, this would have been accurate. There is exactly 4 miles between Stokes of Hampden, the point at which he began his journey, and Sandy Hole. I can't find any sources that say Sandy Hole was once called Sandy Road, but according to this map, dated 1841, The general area around the road appears to have been called Sandy Hole, as opposed to the road itself. But in this reconstructed map, dated as late 19th century, the name of the road was in fact Sandy Hole, as it is today. It's possible that either the author or the original storyteller got the road name wrong. This confusion over the road's name puts the story's credibility into question, especially as both men were local, and you'd expect their knowledge of the area to be better. Going back as far as the 1841 census, I could not trace the Clifford family name to the village, but that doesn't mean the family were never there, as these events are said to have unfolded in the late 18th century, at least 40 years prior to the census. But with old stories dating back many generations like this one, it's hard to say for sure if the accounts are true, wrongly remembered, altered over time, or complete fiction. This next encounter happened in the village of Blackhorton in the county of Devon. On Wednesday, January 6, 1909, an inquest was held into the death of 64-year-old Mary Jane Buckingham, who was found deceased in her bed on the morning of Monday, January 4th. English newspaper The Western Times reported that Mrs. Buckingham had told her friends that on the previous Friday she had seen an apparition in the middle of a road close to her home in Blackhorton. She explained to them that she approached what she thought to be a female apparition and then spoke to her. Giving no response or acknowledgement, the ghostly figure then faded away. At the inquest, a Dr. J.H. Harris concluded that Mrs. Buckingham's death was due to heart disease, and he made no reference to the mysterious encounter. It was the evening of Friday, October 12, 1979, when 26-year-old Roy Fulton drove home from a darts match which he had attended in Leighton Buzzard in the county of Bedfordshire. When Mr. Fulton spoke to author Michael Goss about his experience in 1980, he recalled the time as being around 9:20 p.m. when he drove a road called Peddars Lane in the village of Stanbridge. As Peddars Lane joins Station Road, there were no streetlights at the time, and this is where Fulton recalls seeing a figure of a man stood on the left-hand side of the road. He drove ahead of the stranger and then stopped, so he could see him approaching from behind with the aid of his rear lights. When the stranger arrived at Fulton's van, he let himself in. He was described as being pale, with a long face and dark curly hair. He wore a dark jumper, a white shirt beneath it, and dark trousers. Fulton asked the man where he was heading. The man didn't speak and simply pointed straight ahead. Although he thought this unusual behaviour, Fulton considered that the man may have been mute, so he made no attempt at conversation and drove on. Mr. Fulton assumed that the man was either going to nearby Dunstable or Totten Hoe, so he drove on in that direction. He recalled that 5 or 6 minutes into the journey he turned to his passenger to offer him a cigarette. To his horror, the passenger seat was empty. He slammed on his brakes and swung around to check the back. Nothing. The stranger had disappeared. After a few moments and reluctantly accepting the situation, Fulton drove on to his local pub. He ordered a large scotch and relayed his experience to the landlord and disbelieving bar patrons, before heading to Dunstable Police Station, where he reported the incident and asked if there were any similar incidents on record. Police told him that it was the first they'd heard of a phantom hitchhiker. Fulton's story, according to an Inspector Rowland, raised a few eyebrows at the station, but he admits that they did send a car to investigate the scene. On October 18, 1979, the story appeared in the Dunstable Gazette under the title Night Ride Riddle. But it wasn't Fulton who'd contacted the paper. The story had found its way to Roy Fulton's friend's wife, and then passed on to Mrs. Ann Court, who was a local news reporter for the Dunstable Gazette. Her story appeared on the Thursday, October 18th edition, and the following day she was contacted by the Sunday Express reporter Sally Staples, who made the story national news when she relayed it a few days later. No one ever contacted either paper to report any similar experiences, and the story remained a one-off event. Author Michael Goss, in his 1984 book The Evidence for Phantom Hitchhikers, questioned Fulton's sobriety, pointing to the fact that he had been drinking that night. But during a tape-recorded interview conducted by Goss in 1980, Roy Fulton explained that he had consumed a small amount of alcohol that evening because he was driving. He also mentioned that his profession as a carpet layer relied on him having a driving licence, and that he wasn't prepared to gamble his livelihood. When further pressed on what he had witnessed and asked to be more precise, Fulton said to Goss, "The interior light came on. I remember that. I saw him as clearly as I see you." On the evening of December the 11th, 2002, drivers witnessed a car lose control and swerve off the southbound carriageway of the A3 road close to the town of Burpham in Surrey. Details of what was actually reported that night are scarce, but after the individuals who witnessed the scene reported it, police made a search of the area and found no vehicle and no signs that a crash had taken place. Then on December 13th, a second search was made. That's when police found a maroon-coloured Vauxhall Astra lying nose down 20 yards from the busy road. The car was covered by vegetation, and on further investigation, a grim discovery was made. The decomposing, partially skeletal remains of a person was found a short distance from the car. The deceased driver had clearly tried to climb the bank of the A3 to seek help, but was unable to make it before dying from their injuries. Through dental records, the body was found to be 21-year-old Christopher Chandler from Isleworth in West London. He had last been seen in Hounslow, West London the previous July, before he became a hunted man after carrying out a robbery. At the time of his death, he was on the run from London's Metropolitan Police, but was never apprehended and was subsequently reported missing by his brother. His phone records showed a final attempt to call his brother, lasting less than 1 second, but it's unknown if the call was made before or after the crash. Coroner Dr. Karen Chandler, no relation to the deceased, said that it was likely that Mr. Chandler had died because of the crash, but there was no proof and the cause of death was left as an open verdict. Could it be possible that the people who witnessed the headlights of a car veering off the road at that precise location in December of 2002, in fact witnessed a ghostly replay of what had been Christopher Chandler's last moments 5 months earlier?